For the first time in the life cycle of the 2024 books, we now have an errata, and some of these changes are pretty important for the game, so we're not going to waste any time. Let's talk about what's changing. The first thing I will point out is that a few of these things that you're going to see have technically already been fixed or kind of shadow errataed. That is to say that some of the changes were made on D&D Beyond in some cases quite a while ago, but were never publicly or officially acknowledged in any capacity. So for anyone that doesn't use D&D Beyond and just relies on the physical printed books, they wouldn't have been aware of any of these updates. This is actually the case for the first change we're seeing, Powerful Build. I should also point out that there is now a free PDF available for download for anyone who is using the physical books, and any future printed versions of the books will also contain all of these updates. So, Powerful Build. This trait gave advantage on any saving throw to end the grappled condition. However, in the 2024 rules, saving throws are not made to end the grappled condition. As a result, they have now correctly updated the wording to stipulate that Goliaths now have advantage on any ability check made to end the grappled condition. There isn't really a whole lot to say about this one. Everyone kind of already knew that this was just an error, but we're glad to see that it's been fixed. Really quickly, I am pushing towards 15,000 subscribers, so if you'd like to help me get there, it helps a whole lot more than you think. Thanks. Next is the Grappler feat, which has the section Fast Wrestler. It reads, your speed isn't halved when you move a creature that is grappled by you if the creature is your size or smaller. But as defined in the grappled condition, your speed isn't halved when moving a creature that you're grappling. Movement simply costs 1 extra foot per foot of movement. This has now been changed to say, you don't have to spend extra movement to move, which sounds like a completely inconsequential difference, but it really isn't. It's important to remember the distinction between speed and movement. Speed is how far you can move, and movement is how much of your speed you use when you move. Unless something happens, your speed does not change as you move. So with that in mind, consider a situation where your character has a speed of 30. You move 15 feet into some effect that then halves your speed. Your speed is now set to 15. You've already moved 15 feet. As a result, you can no longer move anymore. Or consider the inverse. You begin in an area that halves your speed. You move 15 feet and just get out of it. Now your speed is back to 30, which means you can continue to move another 15 feet. This inconsistency is just confusing and does have mechanical implications on the game. The update to the language here just helps correct this inconsistency and makes the feature make a lot more sense. Next up is the Poisoner feature, where it used to read, until you hit with the poisoned item. It now reads, until you deal damage with the poisoned item. This is mostly just a quality of life improvement. It's entirely possible to hit and not deal damage, such as if the creature is immune to your weapon. This just helps protect the fairly large investment you've made in these items, so it's nice to see. Moving on to Telekinetic, the fix here is a pretty basic one that basically everyone saw coming. The Minor Telekinesis sub-feature allowed the range of Mage Hand to increase by 30 feet. However, it said nothing of how far that the Mage Hand could be away from you before it disappeared. This also kind of felt implied to me that it would also extend the distance that the hand could be away from you before disappearing, but it is nice to see that they have confirmed it to now be the case. Moving on to the next section, which is equipment, there's a pretty small change here. They just specified that it now requires the use of the utilize action to don or doff your shield. What's funny is that despite how largely inconsequential this is, it was actually a question I had asked Treant Monk before the new PHP officially released, and it looks like I was actually right. Checkmate, Chris. Alright, next up is the big category, spell changes. There are two main categories of changes here, Conjure Spells and Temporary Hit Points. Let's start with the Conjure Spells. Conjure Fey, Elemental, and Minor Elementals have all received nerfs. That's right, Conjure Minor Elementals has finally been addressed. Despite literally everyone giving the feedback during the playtest period that the scaling of damage by 2d8 per level was completely busted, they just decided to print it like that anyway. Fortunately, they've seen the error of their ways and have decided to change the scaling on CME to do 1d8 per spell level, which I think ends up making it much more reasonable. It's still a very good spell, it's just not completely busted anymore. The scaling was totally out of control. In a similar fashion, Conjure Elemental has also been brought down from 2d8 per level above 5th to 1d8 per level above 5th, but I'm not sure how much this one really needed the change. This is a single target spell that does require a bit of effort to get going, given that it requires a creature to enter its space or start its turn there. I feel like this scaling at 2d8 per level wasn't all that egregious, so I'm not sure I understand why it was nerfed, other than to be consistent with Minor Elementals. Next is Conjure Fey, and while I kind of didn't get Conjure Elemental, I really do not understand why they felt the need to scale down Conjure Fey from 2d12 to 1d12. This was such a mid spell to begin with, to the point that it almost felt like it was designed by different people than the people that made the rest of the Conjure spells. Pretty much the only redeeming part of it was the fact that it scaled fairly well, and now it doesn't. I'd love to know the rationale behind this adjustment. Also, they did technically change Conjure Woodland Beings, but not in any meaningful way. The upcasting section used to mistakenly say above 5th level despite it being a 4th level spell. This was shadow errata on D&D Beyond a while ago, but they have finally confirmed it now. Okay, so now with all that out of the way, the next major group of changes were in relation to temporary hit points. This was a pretty big discussion point early on in the release of the 2024 Player's Handbook, and has finally mostly been clarified now. I even made an entire video about this months ago. The spells this change impacts are Animal Shapes, Polymorph, Shape Change, and True Polymorph. You can see on screen what all the specific language of the changes made were, but essentially, the errata now confirms that any of the temporary hit points provided by these spells disappear when the spell ends. This is a very welcome confirmation, and was more or less the way that most people opted to run it anyway, since it created some wild interactions otherwise. Even in my video where I discussed temporary hit points, the conclusion that I came to was that it was likely intentional that the designers wanted them to persist, but that I would continue to run it to say that they end with the spell. Well, looks like I was wrong about their intention. Checkmate me. Or maybe they just changed their mind after seeing how it played out. In any case, I think a lot of people are pleased to see that this has now been clarified. Now, it is worth noting that there are a few pretty sizable exceptions here. Wild Shape was not changed. There was nothing added to the section to state that temporary hit points provided by Wild Shape disappear when your transformation ends, so that still largely remains up in the air. You could say that they should, so it would be consistent with the other temporary hit point providing effects. But on the other hand, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that they should persist since those other spells specifically call it out, whereas Wild Shape does not, so maybe they should stick around. I'd be very curious to hear what you all think. My gut says I would still end the temporary hit points when the transformation ends, just for consistency. The other big question mark is with Armour of Agathys, which was another key discussion point a few months ago. The combination of Polymorph with Armour of Agathys made for an incredibly powerful defensive and offensive buff to a creature. But as we can see, not only did we get no changes to the language of Armour of Agathys, we also saw no adjustment to the general language surrounding temporary hit points and how a change in them is actually applied. Say you have your 5 temp HP from Armour of Agathys, and then someone casts Polymorph on you. Are your temporary hit points very, very briefly set to 0, therefore ending the spell, and then have the Polymorph spell take over? Or do they instantaneously replace the hit points, which would mean that Armour of Agathys technically didn't end, and you could continue to use the temp HP from Polymorph to power your armor? There is still no clear answer on this, which is kind of surprising to me, given that they really spent a large portion of this errata making changes to the temporary hit point spells. One final change they made to the Player's Handbook was in relation to the hide action, which has been another incredibly confusing and contentious rule update since the release of the new Player's Handbook. They changed the language from "you have the invisible condition" to "you have the invisible condition while hidden," and "the condition ends on you" to "you stop being hidden." Honestly, the entire discussion of how hidden and hiding works in the new 2024 rules is probably deserving of an entire video on its own, because it is just so weirdly complicated and kind of counterintuitive. This change to the hide action helps to clarify that you can't just be hidden while standing in the open, but it still leaves a whole bunch of stuff unanswered. I won't get into it here, but they did also make some slight tweaks to the chases in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and they also updated a bunch of monsters from the new Monster Manual. Pretty much all of these had already been shadow errata a couple of months ago when the Monster Manual was released though. Anyway, that's it. This was a quick one. Let me know your thoughts on the changes, and be sure to subscribe to help me reach 15,000 subs. Otherwise, take care.